Welcome everybody, welcome to our ASCILITE live webinar. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands and waterways on which we are meeting, which are in all different parts of the continent and potentially in other parts of the world. And you're welcome to acknowledge the traditional custodians in the chat if you'd like to. And also pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging, and to anybody who identifies as First Nations who's joining us. We have what will be a great presentation this morning, and thank you for so many of you for coming. We've got Esther, Kimberly and Danny, who were actually winners of one of our innovation awards at the last conference, and the key title is around Modular Professional Learning Framework. But I'm just also going to, before I get them to come in, I'm going to do a little plug for ASCILITE, because I know most of you probably are members of ASCILITE already, but if you're not, or if you've just become, you might not be sure what we've got happening. And you'll see on my slide there, I've got lots and lots of ways that you can get involved. And we're also very keen on, you can join our special interest groups, you can come to the webinars, you can be involved without actually being a member too. So we're actually really open to just getting as many people into the community and having the conversations with us around all sorts of things. But, we obviously have a focus around things like educational technologies. And I'm sure the people here who are going to present, who are from Sydney Uni, Sydney Uni's hosting our conference this year. And it's about reconnecting. So also a bit of a plug, if you haven't looked at the conference yet, the call out for papers is out. And you'll be able to find all that on the website. And if you follow us on our social media, there's been posts and what have you around that too. And I can tell you for most of us who work in academia, the ASCILITE conference proceedings are seen as ERA ranked conference. And we're also working very hard to make sure that our publications, thanks Danny for putting that in the chat, our publications are really we're getting DOIs for things, and we're trying to make sure that all of that will also count. So please consider publishing, coming to our conference and putting things out for the conference. Okay, so I won't say too much about what you're about to hear. I know Esther, Kimberly and Danny are keen for you to interact with them as well. And we've talked about using the chat, because there's 3 of them. You'll be able to get interactions back from them when one's presenting. And also if you've got a question, if you can try not to do the hand waving in your room, but if you can actually use the hand raised function in Zoom. And I'm hoping that most people know where they're going to find that. And maybe whoever starts might actually reinforce that for you as well. I see it, like, great. So there's the functionality in the space that I'm hoping most people are used to. Great. Thank you, everybody, for giving me thumbs up. See, I still like to do it in the room. Okay, so the team here from Sydney University, doubling engagement with professional learning through Choose Your Own Adventure, the Modular Professional Learning Framework. I'm going to hand it over to you. I'm going to stop sharing and away we go.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Let me just set up share screen. Thank you for inviting us. We're really happy to be here and happy to share our experience of redesigning academic development to take a modular approach at the University of Sydney. So I'm Kimberly, and I'm joined by my colleagues Danny and Esther, who you'll meet shortly. Oh, sorry, just, what have I done? Sorry about that. Who you'll meet shortly. And not present here today, but part of the core team are our colleagues Samantha Clark and Jessica Frawley, who can't be here today. So I'm just going to put into the chat a link to the slide deck if you'd like to follow along on your own version of the slides. And Danny's also posted to the chat the prompt that you can see on the screen. So to kick off, what we'd like you to do is reflect on your best experience of continuing professional development from the angle of being a participant and why that was. So what made it effective? And if you wouldn't mind, once you thought of it, just posting a very short response to the chat. I'll just give you a minute to do that.
So thanks for those popping up some ideas there. Because we're all friends here, and because we want this to be a fairly informal session, we can, I guess, reflect on why we're doing this. So we usually display a slide like this at the beginning of our professional development sessions while people are still streaming into the room, and it's a nice way to get people just engaged and chatting on Zoom as we get started. So thanks for those for offering their reflections.
Yeah, people have already kicked us off with, so what made it effective were moments where you could reflect on processes or practice. Interactivity was important for Anne. It was an experiential experience, intensive applicability for Gail, immediately being applicable. So some repeated ideas coming through. Great, keep them coming as you think of them, but we'll draw on these as we progress through the session today. Okay, so moving on, what we're going to cover today in the next 51 minutes is an introduction to who we are and how we work. And then we're going to explain what the Modular Professional Learning Framework is. We use the MPLF shorthand, which refers to the new approach to professional learning that we've designed and had in place since 2019. We'll show you what this is, how it works, and how it came to be. And then with Esther, you'll get to experience some modules in a bit more depth. So we'll give you some snapshots into those modules. And then Danny will talk about the impacts the MPLF has had so far and some of the challenges that we've experienced along the way. And as Lisa said at the beginning, there are three of us. Please put your questions in the chat along the way, and we'll attempt to answer them along the way as well. But we'll also have time at the end for just a discussion and some more questions. Okay, so who are we and how do we work? Where do we sit? So we're a team of academic developers that sits within the DVC Educational Innovation Unit. And we offer professional development, academic development, centrally for all educators across our institution at the University of Sydney. So as you can imagine, that's quite a challenge because it covers the gamut of teaching and learning contexts across our institution. So we have clinical education, we have work integrated learning, we have teaching in labs, we have studio learning, we have traditional lectures and tutorials, and we have educators who are experienced educators, we have those who are completely new to teaching, we have professional staff who design educational experiences and support education. We have a crop of education-focused academics, we have tutors, we have a lot of different types of educators and they all have different needs. So the MPLF, the approach we took was to develop it in consultation with all of our faculties, and we deliver it in partnership with experts in faculties. So it's a very sort of co-designed and co-delivered approach. Okay, so what is the Modular Professional Learning Framework, or MPLF? How does it work? And why did it come to be? So starting with taking us back to 2019, at the time, Sydney University had scored quite poorly on a couple of student surveys around their student experience. And in particular, we scored poorly on the areas of teaching quality, provision of feedback, quality assessment, inclusive teaching practices, etc. And so although there were, of course, pockets of good teaching that were going on, excellent teaching, we really needed to address this and to upskill as many educators as possible in these key areas. And prior to 2019, our centrally run professional learning programs were one size fits all. So they were offered, one of them was a 2-day course offered in between semesters, and it was the same 2-day course for all educators. And that format made it difficult for some staff to be able to access that professional learning to begin with. So because it was run on our main campus, it was difficult for staff on satellite campuses to come. It was difficult for staff who couldn't take out 2 whole days to dedicate to CPD for learning. So in our strategy for 2020, really focused on the need to change the way that we deliver CPD for our educators and to adapt it so that it was responsive to staff needs, it was accessible, it had as much reach as possible to different types of staff, and it was highly relevant for different types of educators. So that was our impetus for change and our motivation. So to give you an idea of what it looked like before and what it changed to, before we had 2 centrally run professional learning programs. They were offered, as I said, face-to-face 3 times a year. They were the centrally run ones. And then alongside that, each faculty had their own faculty-based training for their staff. So most faculties, for instance, have a tutor development program. What it looks like now, after the development of it, I'll take you through in a moment. Now what we have instead is we've chunked what good educators need to know and be able to do into 21 bite-sized independent modules. So it's a modular approach that we take now. And these modules are either offered online or in hybrid modes, depending on lockdowns and that sort of thing. And they're blended. So there's also a component that is undertaken on our learning management system Canvas. And although these 21 modules are independent, they can be taken in any order, they can be taken at any time. We've designed 5 official learning pathways across the modules, and they're designed for the needs of particular groups of educators. We also implemented a module credit scheme so that staff who had completed recently an equivalent training in faculty could get recognition for that training and wouldn't have to repeat the same training. And it's now open to all staff, and professional staff are sort of more openly encouraged to come. Okay, so firstly, apologies, this timeline is not to scale, but I want to take you through the steps that we took, the main steps we took in developing the Modular Professional Learning Framework starting in 2019. So in March, we undertook an environment scan of CPD offerings around Australia and internationally to really see how others were doing this and what we could learn from them. Then we developed our own module learning outcomes, and we sort of had a wireframe design set in place by about April. In April, that month was dedicated to consultation meetings with all of our faculties at the University of Sydney. And they were quite high-level meetings where we showed the wireframe design and we really got their input and their feedback on the module learning outcomes, whether they were aligning with the learning gaps in those faculties. We got input on learning outcomes, on changing the names of modules, on new modules, gaps that existed in our wireframe design. So taking all this on board, we designed and built the new Canvas site that houses all of the materials. And we also designed and built the learning materials for the modules. So that was quite a rapid development of the MPLF. So in that 5-month period, we went from an initial design, an initial sketch of what it would look like through consultation to delivery. We launched in July of 2019. It was the first iteration of our module sessions, and we, from the beginning, have launched in hybrid mode. So we've had a face-to-face delivery and staff joining online. And then by September of 2019, we'd finalised our integration with faculty training so that participants could get credit for faculty training that they had already completed. By the end of 2019, we'd run our second delivery of modules in hybrid mode, learning from the first. And then COVID hits in January, February 2020. At this point, content needs to adapt very quickly in response to the new teaching and learning context and the needs associated with it. We shift to completely online delivery via Zoom. And thus our activities change, the techniques that we use to, the techniques that we employ change as well. And in July 2020, in response to more people needing training and the shifting types of training needs, we offer more training. So 2 iterations of our MPLF winter intensive there to reach as many people as possible ahead of teaching in semester 2 of that year. Okay, and then throughout this whole process since launch has been a process of iteration on the modules after they are delivered. So we look at feedback from our participants, what's been working, what isn't working, and we adapt for each iteration. Now in December 2020, at that point in time, we realized that it was working best to shift to offering module sessions in intensive periods. So before semester 1 in January, February, in between semester 1 and semester 2, and at the end of semester 2, we offer between 8 and 15 usually module sessions. We no longer offer standalone module sessions throughout the semester, and that's because we realized that uptake is low during the semester as people get really busy. And also the intensives mean that people can think about their teaching and implement their new knowledge and their new learnings in that semester. Also in December 2020, this is the start of our MPLF customizations for other groups of staff, for other groups, sorry. And Danny will talk more about that in a moment. In January of last year, we launched a new module on supporting interdisciplinary learning. And then by the end of last year, we've launched our module 20, supporting diverse experiences in learning and teaching. And now what we're working on now is a return to hybrid mode for some of our modules. And that's in response to our staff returning to campus. So that's broadly the planning and design and development of the MPLF over the last 2 and a bit years. So a perennial issue with all CPD, or most CPD, is how you motivate staff to engage with it, how you motivate staff to undertake the CPD to begin with. So we have 2 embedded mechanisms to bring the horse to water, if you like. The first one is that we've embedded in the confirmation process or the probation requirements for some groups of staff the need to complete one of the pathways in the MPLF. So that brings in quite a lot of people who need to complete that requirement. But our second motivator is quite different. It operates differently. And that's completion of a pathway in the MPLF prepares participants for application for fellowship to advance HE. And we're leveraging this, the goal of many people to attain fellowship as fellowships are gaining recognition and are becoming more widespread. So the way that works is completion of a pathway is sort of ticks off the one of the needs, which is to engage with CPD in education, and module 19, which is core to all the pathways, is designed to help educators think critically and reflectively about their practice, and to write that up in the style that's suited to a fellowship application, and to get feedback on it before they write up a full application. Okay, so this slide there's quite a lot in this slide. It's sort of the internal organs of the MPLF, but let me take you through it in chunks, because this is what the MPLF looks like and how it works. So the first column are our 21 modules, and you can see the names of them in the rows. And this is how they're offered. So the majority of the modules have a compulsory 2-hour synchronous session that's live, and that is either online via Zoom or in hybrid mode. But we do have a couple of modules that are offered asynchronously and completely online. At the top, you can see there are 5 learning pathways, our official learning pathways. So while it's of course possible for staff to choose their own adventure and to complete their own combination of modules, we've designed these 5 pathways to suit the needs of particular staff. So we have our principles and practices pathway, a pathway for new coordinators or subject conveners, and a pathway for tutors, a pathway for education-focused staff, and a pathway designed to support the needs of our professional staff who work as designers and support officers. And then depending on the pathway, modules are either core or elective or selective. Core means that they're compulsory learning for that pathway. Selective means that they're highly recommended for that pathway, and elective means that they are that staff can choose the other modules based on their own interests, perhaps, or their own specific needs. And each pathway comprises 12 modules, so 8 cores, 2 selective units, and 2 elective units. So within a pathway, as you can see, there's also there are core modules that people have to complete, but there's also choice, the offering of choice, so people can choose what's most relevant to them. So they're the core, selective, and elective modules. And as you can see, a couple of modules are core for all pathways. So inclusivity and diversity is core, assessment and feedback for learning is core, and reflective account of practice is core. And that's because we need to reach as many people as possible and upskill in these areas. Okay, and then these are the different types of staff that we have at the university, and these are the corresponding learning pathways that they might take. So principles and practices pathway is the most common pathway that people tend to undertake. We have, sessional teachers, they often do the tutor training pathway, etc. Okay, and what we've learnt a lot from other people. So we really had a look to see what was out there already. Our approach to academic development, professional learning, is heavily influenced by adult learning theories, in particular Knowles' andragogy theory. And to the right, you can see a couple of our main influences, courses that already existed, learning approaches, design approaches that exist. Okay, so now over to you. What we'd like you to do now is think about some of the teaching and learning challenges that you see are issues in your own institution, and consider what these are. So there are a couple of prompts on the screen to help you with this idea. So what do educators struggle with? What do students struggle with? What do educators need to develop? What skills are missing? And what challenges do educators and students both face? So what we'd like you to do is post this to the Padlet link, and I'll just put that in the.
So the reason we're asking this is that we've prepared a few kind of mini module tasters over the next few slides, which we'll spend a bit of time on, and we're not going to get time to do them all, but it'd be useful to kind of think about what your institution development needs are, and if you let us know through the Padlet, we can kind of decide which ones to show you. So there's a number of really good ideas coming through, like motivating staff, finding time, and those kind of things. I was wondering if you could also post about the teaching and not just the CPD challenges, but the actual learning and teaching challenges. So it could be around student engagement, maybe it's around retention, maybe it's around active learning, maybe it's around curriculum design and those kind of things. So not so much the challenges with getting staff to do CPD, but rather the topics that staff need in CPD. Okay, so there seems to be a lot on, a lot of the initial responses were quite good around kind of workload and getting people's time and commitment and motivation to come along. And so Kimberly's mentioned some of those ideas around kind of working with our HR to kind of get it into confirmation requirements, to get the MPLF into confirmation requirements, those kind of things. There's things coming through around engagement. That seems to be a lot. So maybe Esther, we could go through MO8. What do you reckon?
Yeah, there's lots of stuff on hybrid and learning engagement, so that's a good one. Yeah.
There seems to be a lot on feedback and assessments and those kind of things as well. So I can't remember, did we prepare an MO5 one?
That's one of the ones we didn't.
Okay, that's all right. What else? So there's active learning, and so that's good. Feedback literacy, maybe we should prepare an MO5 one.
There's teaching on like maybe M13.
Yeah, I think M13. So maybe we do the MO8 and M13 ones.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry, that's just internal jargon for the tasters that we're going to be showing you next. But Esther, do you mind going back to the slide pack so I can talk through the next one? So what we're going to be doing is, Esther, you might need to just refresh your slide deck.
Okay.
Right.
And I think go back one, Esther.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay, so before we, the very first question we asked you was around, good CPD experiences you've experienced yourself. And these are the copy and paste of the Zoom chat things that we all shared around. And I've just tried to kind of clump them into bits. And there's kind of 5 main themes coming through. It's primarily about applicability, about reflection as well, and encouraging practitioner reflection. The idea that these good CPD experiences we've had have been really interactive and hands-on, and how important that is. In the middle, kind of, there's a few ideas around modeling, and so the presenters or the CPD deliverers actually modeling good practice, and that's a really interesting thing to pull out as well. And on the right, there's a lot, which is really good to see, around learning from others in community. And so hopefully, as Esther talks through the module tasters for module 8 and module 13 coming up soon, you'll see a lot of these ideas come through the tasters. Okay, so Esther, over to you.
Esther, just a second, actually. Hang on.
Classic. Thanks, Kimberly. Okay, so MO8 is one of my favorite modules, actually, so I'm very chuffed to be able to talk about it to you. And it looks at engaging our students in lectures, or sort of more broadly in large classes. So what can we do to keep that group engaged? This module particularly went through that kind of revision that Kimberly was talking about, as we moved from talking about large classes and lectures back in the day when we're all sharing the same physical space, so the lecture theatre that you can think of back in 2019. And then as very quickly we moved that context into Zoom, and what did that look like? How do we get lots of students engaging on Zoom? And then as people started, or as our staff started to come back onto campus, how do we make sure that we can continue engaging our students in the slightly more complex HyFlex context? So how does that work? And then also hopefully thinking about, if we do end up, all of us, back in the physical classrooms, well, how can we take forward things that we have learned from going through Zoom and going through hybrid learning, and to make sure that we don't end up looking like 2019 moving forward. So this is what the brief outline of MO8 looks like for us. So this is one of our modules that we've called blended. So it has a before, during and after section. We asked our participants to do some things before they come to class. We engage them in some activities, and then afterwards get them to do a reflective task. And what I'll do after we run us through some of these points is I'll show you some of the sort of activities that are typically MO8 for us, to show you what that looks like in detail. So before the session starts, we encourage our participants to watch a mini lecture. So this used to be what we started with. It's a very didactic section talking about what we think of as the lecture, and we removed it and turned it into an asynchronous activity. It's embedded in a studio player on our Canvas site, and we have left the commenting tool function available. And there's some lovely chatter and some robust discussion about what we think of as a lecture coming from our participants and from our colleagues. So that's always really nice to see. Even before they come into our modules, they're starting to engage with the content. We also ask our participants to have a look at a set of lecture slides that we will then use as part of activities in the module itself. This is a set of slides, or it's a slide deck that one of our colleagues have donated to this purpose. And we then use that to engage with during the session about some of the things that we talk about and learn about. We also, as an optional task, link to a video that looks at how active learning takes place in a physical, face-to-face large class, a class that's very, very jam-packed full of students. In fact, after COVID, I always feel uncomfortable about the social distancing, but it's how active learning can take place even when you have such a big group of students together in a physical space. And it's a very nice example. So during the session, we have a number of sort of brief activities and games that tries to link some of the theories that we also talk to our participants about. So we end up talking about the cognitive load theory, the multimedia theory, and some ideas around constructivism. And I'm going to play one of these games with you. I won't tell you which one it's linked to so I don't ruin the game. And then what we do is we redesign that slide deck from the pre-work. First, we do that through the lens of redesigning it for a cognitive load. So we ask us participants to hack the slides and see what they would change to address some of the cognitive load problems that you come across in that slide deck. We then have a guest speaker for about 10 minutes, and she usually talks about her own approaches to active learning in her large classes, in their large classes. And we find this really an important thing to do so that modeling and examples don't just come from our internal teaching team, but that we're tapping into the experiences of our colleagues across the university. It also hopefully reinforces that some of the ideas we talk about are infinitely possible to work and do in your own classrooms with undergrad and postgrad students. They don't just work in the CPD environment. So it's important to speak to that. We then go back and apply some of those ideas around active learning and chunking to the slide decks again. So there's a second round where we hack the lecture slides again, this time focusing on how to make those activities more engaging for our students, or how that might work. The after work task for this session is to write about 100 to 200 words of reflection about how what we may have talked about connects to your own context. So very quickly, I'll show you one of our example tasks, and this one is around thinking about our students' brains. So in this activity, I would like you very quickly to memorize the symbols that correspond to those numbers. I'll give you, I don't know, 15 seconds to do that. 1 to 9, those are our symbols. Okay. I assume you've learned that now. Okay, can you write on a piece of paper or on whatever what the symbols would be for those numbers? And then if I give you the answer in the chat, could you tell me how many of them you got correct? Got not a chance. 0, 1, didn't even try. 2, 20, yep. 0, 1, 1, 0, yep. That's usually what we get. What if I show you that? So what we next do with everybody in the class is to say, why would it work better if I shown you this to learn the symbols than what we did and showed you that? Why would it have helped you do that? And we get a bunch of responses in the chat. I won't make you do that. We're running late already. But we get ideas around, it's not about memorizing, but hanging knowledge off each other, doing that sort of thing, creating a structure and context. So hopefully you know what the idea here is that we're talking about constructivism. So what we're trying to do here is make sure that we can connect those theories into the embedded experiences of our participants. So instead of talking about the theory in isolation, try and connect it to something fun, something active for us, our participants. And the activity taster 2 here is just an outline of that hacker lecture activity. I talked about it a little bit already, so I won't go into more detail, but it's for you to have a look at this if you're interested after this session. So that's our MO8. Danny or Kimberly, is there anything in the chat that you would like me to speak to or that either of you would like to add? No? you're happy? Okay. Thank you. So then we will move on to M13 here. Let me just find all the things I wanted to share with you about M13. M13 is our module on blended and online learning. And here we're very keen to have participants think about how to improve specific problems or outcomes within their own teaching context. So it's some of those ideas that you shared with us on Padlet. How do we make sure that what we talk about is practical enough to then implement and put into action within your own context, not just in the general context. So the pre-work for this module, as you can see, is to come already thinking about a problem or something specific that you want to fix within this session, maybe a learning outcome. And we're also keen to give people a chance to engage with our university policies. I'm sure you've come across this. We don't often sit and read policies. They can be quite dry. So what we've done is we've curated a bunch of the policies that might relate specifically to this topic. And we ask our participants to read some of these and to post the ones that are surprising to Padlet. And we find that there is no shortage of surprising policies in our documents, but hopefully it's something engaging for our students to, or our participants to do even before they come to this session. In the class or in the 2-hour synchronous session, what we do is we explore some Canvas sites, and I'll come back to this in a little bit. But here the idea is that we're asking our participants, who are mostly educators and teachers, to put on the hat of being a student or stand in their shoes and explore what it might feel like to land in a Canvas site you're not familiar with, and what does that experience feel like. Then we look at some of the set data from our university, which we call the Unit of Study Feedback Survey data. So this talks about what students' experiences within units were like. It is very, very anonymous. It's a very pooled data set, so there's no recognition of individual units. It's rather looking across the institution and across the experience of our students in the institution about what their experiences were when the unit was a productive and a good unit for them, and when they struggled. And we look at the patterns that emerge out of that, which talk to our teaching and learning philosophies and principles at the university, but also very clearly speak to our students' experiences about when they feel supported and what kind of things online and in general makes them feel supported. We then have a break, because after that data set, people usually are quite desperate for a break and come back thinking about Laureate's 6 types of learning, and then a redesign activity, which is an ABC cards activity, if you're familiar with that. I'll show you what that looks like in a minute, so just bear with me. The task at the end is to submit that bit of work into Canvas for us to comment on and have a look at. So this is one of the open Canvas sites. This is us asking our students to put on and step into the shoes of students and to have a look at what it's like to explore a Canvas site. So this is our open site. It's a spin-off of an open door. So the idea here is that you can think about what it's like to learn in here, think about what it might feel like to be a student in here, and then start thinking about how you could adapt this site or something similar for flexible learning. So this is our ABC card activity. I'm conscious of time, so I won't go into too much detail here, but this is how I built up this session in this ABC card. So we started with a bit of discussion, because we got you to answer the chat at the beginning. Then we did a bit of acquisition learning. So Kimberly shared some ideas. We went back to the Padlet, so we were doing some discussion, and now I'm talking at you again. So back to a bit of acquisition learning. I can keep building on this. So next we're going to do probably slightly more acquisition. So then he's going to talk about something else. So you can see how you can build this up slowly. The key here is that you can use this tool up here to analyze your learning design. And what we get our participants to do is to have a look and think about how many different ways and types of learning their students are engaging with as part of their design. So here I'm a very flat acquisition discussion example. What I should be able to do is start thinking about maybe introducing something different like practice. And then if I come back here, you can see I'm introducing some variety into this build. So we get our students to think about a particular example in their context. So that can be a single unit, a single week, or a single session like I've done now, and think about how you might be able to redesign and think about making it a sort of wider set of experiences for our students. So very briefly, that's our M13. And again, I'm just checking with you if you have anything that, Kimberly, you'd like to add.
Just loved coming through about the ABC framework. Very useful. Yep.
Comment in the chat. Danny, would you like the slides?
No, I think you should keep the slideshow just so we don't have to keep swapping hosts around. Do you mind refreshing the screen though?
Sure can.
Thank you. All right, so just to quickly sum up, I guess what we've seen, Esther, on the next slide, over the last, however long it's been, 3 years almost now, 2.5 years, we've had almost 4,000 full module completions over the years, which is kind of a 75% increase over the equivalent engagement. So it's kind of nice. Part of that would be just because people were kind of scrounging for CPD during COVID. And so it's not just because the MPLF is modular, but also just because the timing with COVID kind of fit. But what's been quite pleasing is people have found that the way that we've taught through the MPLF delivered it, and also what we've designed into it in terms of content has been quite useful. On the next slide, what you can actually see is you can see the distribution of what people are actually looking for when they look at CPD. And so you can see that kind of the really popular modules, kind of module 1, 2, 3, 5, and also kind of 8 and 9, and also 13, 14. And these ones are kind of around online blended teaching, they're around curriculum design, assessment, and these kinds of things. And so over the years, that kind of distribution has remained fairly stable. And like Kimberly was saying, we've been able to add a few modules like module 20 and 21 over the time as well. But it's interesting for us to kind of think back and think what's actually been useful for people at the university to do. On the next slide, what we've got is we've got a kind of Kimberly mentioned before that we've been able to take the modular nature of the MPLF and kind of adapt it to other contexts. One of the first contexts that we adapted it to was actually a tertiary college in Sydney, where we were kind of asked to say, well, we've got this thing, can we deliver it in a similar way, but in a relevant way to their educators? And so what we did is we built a 4-module course, I guess, for them. And those 4 modules were a combination of existing modules that we have in the MPLF, and you can kind of see how the matchup goes there. And then last year, I think it was, we were asked to do this for New Zealand University. One of the people are here today in the call, actually. I won't nominate the university, but they had 3 modules, which were also developed based on the modules that we had developed already. And so we had to do some adaptation, but because the modular nature of the MPLF was fairly flexible, it allowed us to fairly quickly adapt it to different contexts. And finally, in terms of COVID teaching and faculties and those kind of things within the University of Sydney, we were able to adapt some of the modules to other kinds of uses. So for example, the inclusivity module, thinking about how that relates to helping students transition to university, and adapting it to different faculties' needs. And also, like Kimberly was saying before, when COVID hit, quickly adapting module 8, for example, to hit ideas around HyFlex and also online teaching. So on the next slide, the modularization has not always been a amazing kind of thing. It's worked for the most part, I think, and people have gotten used to it. But one of the initial things that we felt was that when we had everyone doing the same thing, it was nice because we had a cohort feel. It was not nice because people said, half of these things aren't relevant to me. So it's an interesting balance between that. The cohort feel isn't quite back yet with the MPLF. But we don't quite know how to fix that, but maybe it's not a huge problem because it helps people to balance their workload. The relevance is also there because they can pick and choose things, but also an ongoing challenge for us is just to keep making sure that the modules stay relevant for people. Another challenge for us is to continue to bring voices in from faculty to make sure that we are getting representation from key educators. We try and get in most of our modules at least 1 or 2 guest speakers in, kind of in the middle, in order to bring a bit of gravitas and a bit of kind of practical experience into it. Again, the idea that we spoke about before about community and sharing is coming in play a lot. The perennial challenge that we all have in delivering CPD is managing expertise and background and motivations of the people who are there. Some people are forced to be there because they're on a performance management plan, for example, and the head of school has said you must go to module 5, and then we have people who are a bit more reluctant to be there. And so obviously managing that. An interesting thing we've seen over the last few years through the modular nature of the MPLF is that it's seen as a magical project longevity fairy. And what I mean by that is you have these people around the university developing maybe a Canvas site or a resource for group work, for example, or developing a resource for active learning. And then they come to us and say, well, actually, since the MPLF is modular, can we add a module 23, which is basically our project, but hand it over to you? And we're thinking, well, actually, no, we already kind of have some things in there. And so it's a constant kind of challenge, I guess, for us to try and take in new things which the university has developed, but also not to see too much module creep in the MPLF. So it's an interesting kind of side effect of the modularization. And obviously a big challenge for this is the admin around it, communications, registration, attendance, submissions, marking, feedback. Thankfully, this is all managed through Canvas, and also another system that we have which does automate a lot of these things for us, and so we don't go too feral with the administration. And the last kind of challenge that we have, which is on this slide, but on the next slide for us kind of going forward is, that's the next slide, sorry, is how to actually measure the impact of professional learning. And as we kind of go into an open question and answer session and casual chat session, we were wondering if people had any ideas about how to actually measure the impact of professional learning. So let's keep that in mind as we go into this kind of casual end of session chat. On the next slide, we just have a few links to places where you can find out more about the MPLF. So those two are little Teaching at Sydney blog articles that we have, which describes kind of our approach, but also you have this slide deck available to you, which you're very welcome to keep referring to as well. So I think with that, I think unless Kimberly and Ess have anything else to add about the presentation bit of it, open to questions, open to suggestions about how to measure impact. You can pop a question in chat, or you can put up your hand. I'm not sure if we've enabled unmuting of yourself.
Can I ask a question, Danny?
Go for it.
You said that one of the motivations is to provide a pathway into AGA accreditation. And I wondered how that works, because in my experience, it works quite well in a smaller cohort. So do you, after the module participation, do you set a group of people aside and let them work on their AGA application together, peer review, for example, their applications, or have writing sessions together? How does that work?
Yeah, it's a really good question. The model that we went through a number of iterations in conversation with AHE, and the model that we ended up doing is module 19 is our kind of compulsory reflective module at the end of the pathway. At the end of each module themselves, most of the modules participants are encouraged to write 100 to 200 words of kind of how the module has transformed their thinking and changed their practices. And at the module 19, they're asked to kind of bring those reflections together into a 500 to 600 word reflection about their current practice, and also, I guess, how everything they've learned connects together. Based on that 600 word reflection, we mark it with the kind of a UK PSF lens on top of it, and then they can then put forward that 600 words towards a fellowship application. So that's essentially half of an AFHEA or 1/5 of an FHEA application. And we found that's the most effective way, that it kind of gives people a leg up into the process without it being officially accredited by the AHE.
Yep. So you don't provide any further assistance or support?
We have a separate program called the Sydney Educational Fellowship Program, which does provide very handy.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's what I wondered, because it doesn't work without further support, in my view, because it's quite labor intense, especially at senior fellowship level. Yep. And I think people are very unsure about how to go about it when they first start off. Okay, thank you.
And I love the ideas coming through the Zoom chat around measuring impact long term, that it's a perennial problem. But seeing kind of completely seeing the impact through peer observation, seeing the impact through impact on Canvas sites, successful applications, and those kind of things, really great ideas.
I've got a question. Did you answer the question that you started with? You know how you started at the beginning, what the problem was, which I think is probably a problem that most of us are seeing in our universities. I can't remember exactly how you worded it, but I'm thinking, are you now seeing some sort of uplift in the staff, or are the students giving feedback that the staff are doing something better? Or
it's a conflated answer because COVID was in the way. So everyone was kind of forced to teach in a different way. And I think across the board, every university had their kind of SCTs increase, even though the SES decreased, especially for us. And so I think it's really hard for us to parse the COVID effect versus the MPLF effect. Good question though.
Have we got any other questions before we wrap things up?
So Alison's got a question about the grad cert. Yep, so we do have a grad cert in higher education. The MPLF doesn't contribute credit, and the way that we figure that is because the MPLF is meant to be evidence-based but very practical, whereas our grad cert is kind of theoretically based but applicable. And Colin's question about the detailed model of what good learning and teaching. Yeah, so we developed a new what we call a principles guiding education at Sydney back during COVID, actually, from analysis of kind of student responses and also literature in the field. And so we've got a 7 principle model, I guess, now of what good learning and teaching looks like.
And there's also a skipped question from Marion about the tool, the ABC tool in printing that I've just reposted.
Yeah, so we're actually working with someone from your university to see if we can make that tool a bit more friendly.
Excellent. Yeah, it was a big stumbling block because we had quite a big team in computer science, and it's really hard when single or individual people work in that tool. You can't actually get a good overview. So we ended up using an old-fashioned Google Sheet and the UTAS course design sheet.
Yep, and Nikki's question, how did the partnership come about? People reached out to us, actually. I'm not sure exactly where they heard about the MPLF, but they read about it somewhere and they reached out to us to get into it.
I think Anne summed it up there. Thanks so much. Like that was really, I personally also found that really interesting. And now I'm going to go back and read the paper. So I hadn't read it before, and pass it around a bit more. I can see why you were one of our innovation winners. So thank you again, Esther, Danny, and who else was with us? Kimberly.
Yeah.
For presenting and for all the the lead up to this as well. So thank you very much. I'm just going to apologize deeply that we had the interruption that we did. I'm so sorry. And rest assured, ASCILITE will be doing everything to make sure it doesn't happen again. And thank you to everybody for helping and bringing it together and continuing, because it was going so well. I was loving it. It was fabulous. So thank you again. Big round of applause to the Sydney University people who've joined us and given us so much. Like, I think you've really shown us and talked to us in a very open way about what you're doing. So I'm hoping that it'll become reciprocal as well, which I'm sure it will. So unless there's anything else that anybody wants to conclude with or comments, I'm going to wrap it up at this point.